We're really excited to have two guests today. We have Kaneisha Bailey Akinpelumi from the Louisiana Energy Transition Engine, and Catherine Armstrong, the project coordinator from the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. This is going to be a conversation, and we're really excited to have them both here. The Q&A function should be working. So as we're talking, I'm going to start with a few questions that we've already decided to talk about with our guests. And then we really encourage those of you who are on the call to ask some more questions. And we're going to pull those as best we can. We have about 40 minutes for our chat, and that's a really great amount of time because we can really get into some details. So, okay, fantastic. Here we are. So hi, Kaneisha. Hi, Catherine. Nice to see you guys.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi. So I want to start with Catherine, and I'm going to ask you a first question. So how did you get involved with an NSF Engines proposal, and what first steps did your team take to start building the coalition? And in this case, you might say a little bit about your organization and, the Industrial Commons. That'd be great.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Armstrong. I am a project coordinator for the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. I'm also the director of the Carolina Textile District, which is an enterprise of the Industrial Commons, just to throw another name out there. But the Industrial Commons is a nonprofit based here in rural North Carolina, working to essentially focus on rural economic development and use our heritage industry, the textile industry, to accomplish something pretty impactful here in our community. And so today I'm representing the Industrial Commons, which is the lead organization in our engine, and our perspective is very much around rural economic development, how we engage all communities within our community towards human flourishing, I'd say, is what we're doing. So regarding how we were introduced to the engine project and how our coalition formed, the proposal actually came across one of our community college partners' desks, and they picked up the phone. They started calling a few of us, expressing their interest in how we should band together, as we were already had these strong partnerships in our region, and we should go after this opportunity. And so again, it just kind of came off across one of our partners' desks, and how we went about forming our coalition is it was really, these were 30 years of relationships that had already been formed. And this was just kind of the perfect opportunity to formalize them in a new way and really advance capacity for our region. And so I would say most partnerships had already been well established, and this was just an exciting thing for us to go after together.
Great. Thank you so much. So Kaneisha, your team has a different origin story. So tell us about how you personally got involved, how the team came together, how your partnership coming from Xavier is part of the engine, and what were the steps that you guys took to build the coalition?
Okay, sure. But just background and context, in addition to my role as interim director of inclusive engagement for the field project, I'm also the associate vice president for research and sponsored programs at Xavier University of Louisiana and HBCU. Our involvement started actually with two different types of engines proposals. So we were initially engaged by another university for a type 1. And we also were invited personally, actually, by the then Vice President of Research and Economic Development at Louisiana State University, or LSU. He reached out, which I think it's good to initially reach out personally if possible, because it seems more meaningful and intentional. So Dr. Bentley at the time invited us to participate. Of course, we agreed, and later became a part of a group of vice presidents of research. That initial group made sense because at universities, in particular research universities, we're kind of the hub for a lot of the components of the engine. So those offices, our offices include work, tech transfer, innovation, of course, research-inspired research and development. So I think that is, if you're interested in partnering with a university, that might actually be a good starting point In addition to those things, most offices like mine also are the first to know about a lot of the opportunities, funding opportunities. This group of the vice presidents across the state, we were asked to help write the initial concept paper. So we were very engaged from the beginning, which I think is important. That concept paper was accepted and we were invited in July of 2022. It's been a long process, so the timeline is a little lengthy. So in July of 2022, we were invited to apply, and then we started expanding our network of stakeholders. So we went from that core group of 5 VPRs, or vice presidents of research, to an initial group of 53 stakeholders. So we started with that group. Our first meeting was held in Baton Rouge at LSU. And the opening of that meeting was opened by President Tate of LSU. So that also sent a message that this was an important initiative, high profile, and eventually all presidents of our core partners attended meetings, and we had significant buy-in, which is also important when you are in a larger institution. So that meeting I think that meeting was in August or September timeframe, and eventually our stakeholder group grew to over 150 participants. So with a group that large, that's certainly challenging, but also beneficial because you get the input from stakeholders from different sectors. So technical and community colleges, nonprofit, workforce development organization, industry, governmental officials. So we had a broad spectrum in terms of our stakeholders. So we had an in-person meeting in September with the larger group. And in order to facilitate such a large group in the proposal development process, LSU hired an external firm to help facilitate our meetings. So that first meeting, we had, a general overview, and then we broke out into groups based on the components of the engines. And then that process kind of sustained throughout the fall. So it's important also to have core partners who are engaged and committed, because we had a number of meetings. And I think the key part, some of them were virtual. I forgot to add that part. What was important about that is I do feel that the perspective and input of the various stakeholder communities that I mentioned, that input was used to develop the proposal. So just engaging people from the start broadly is key. You don't want people to get included later on and not feel a certain level of ownership of the project. So that was very helpful.
Great, thank you. So that was a really great way to talk about how much work it's going to be and how long the timeline is. So this is something that people should be considering. So Catherine, I'm going to come back to you for the next question. So when you considered selecting the lead organization, how did you guys finally make that decision? And then how does that choice help you to figure out your region of service? And some of the guests have been asking about what NSF thinks of the region of service. And just as a reminder, the Q&A should be with the guests. So we can answer questions for the PDs in other ways, like through our email and through the webinar. But today we really want to focus on talking with the guests. So maybe one way to answer the region of service question, Catherine, is for you guys, also helps to determine how you understand your region of service and how that plays into the proposal writing.
Sure, absolutely. So the lead organization for our engine is the Industrial Commons, which is a nonprofit 501c3 based here, again, in Western North Carolina. And our leadership team, we have 8 core partners, I think 6 at the time of our application, involve North Carolina State University's Wilson College of Textiles, which is one of the leading textile institutions in the world. Get the Gaston Textile Technology Center, which is where you go for fiber development in the US. the Manufacturing Solutions Center, which is where all the big brands go for textile testing here in the US, Western Piedmont Community College, which is our local community college system that we had strong partnerships with. We pulled in RTI for our evaluation, the North Carolina Department of Commerce as an additional partner in our government space, as well as NC IDEA as a funding stream for our entrepreneurial programs. So that's our cohort of our leadership team. And we selected the Industrial Commons to be the lead, really because we were steeped in place-based rural economic development, solution building, and ecosystem building, and facilitating deep participation to drive solutions across our region. And so the Industrial Commons was selected among our cohort of leadership partners, and then we teamed up with NC State's Wilson College of Textiles to be the lead for the technical development and research development component. So we have a really strong team, but again, the whole leadership team is critical to this work that we're doing, and we are all based probably within 100 miles of each other here in Western North Carolina. Again, the textile industry is our heritage industry, and our goal is to really kind of is to build it back and create more opportunity within the sustainability space. So a little bit about our region of service. It was selected again based on our concentration of textile industry here. Our region of service spans mid to western North Carolina, part of South Carolina, part of Tennessee, and part of Virginia. And the counties we selected in our surrounding states, we selected them based on the density of textile companies that were concentrated in those counties, because we knew we wanted to make big impact. And we selected those additional counties based on where those companies were located and where our additional partners were based as well. Did I answer all the questions? I think.
Yeah, that's great. I would say, could you just give a few words about how NC State figures in that? Because they're not in your region of service, but they're a core partner, which is possible with engines. So can you just say a little bit about that?
Sure. So I believe they are in our region of service.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yep.
Raleigh. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So just to clarify, the reason I was asking is because you can have partners that are not inside of the region of service who can still work with the team, and the impacts need to be in the region of service. And so we just want to make sure everyone hears that, because we get a lot of questions about that. So you need to define a region of service where we're going to be able to measure impacts and outcomes, but you can work with partners who are outside of that, just to add to that topic. So Kaneisha, what about you guys? So how did you decide that Louisiana State would be lead? And then how did you determine, in your case, that the whole state, all the parishes in Louisiana are the region of service?
Well, LSU initially reached out to everyone. So it was just initiated by them, and then we later decided that it made sense for LSU to lead due to their expertise, capacity, and the establishment of an Energy Innovation Institute. So, and they're also located in our state's capital, Baton Rouge. So they, as a flagship university, had a lot of relationships and resources, which is really important when you have such a large group of stakeholders. In terms of the region of service, initially, actually, we started out with just Southern Louisiana because the pipeline is along that area. But the energy transition and the shift, since that's such energy production is such a huge part of our state's economy, it impacts everyone. Over, I think, 250,000 workers are employed in that industry. And given the nation's and our state's goals to reduce carbon emissions and make the shift to clean energy, it made sense as one of the leading producers of energy. It made sense for us to do it. Some of the other parts of Louisiana, there were organizations and universities, technical and community colleges who also bring expertise. And we wanted to build on all of the expertise in the state and not just a limited region based on the corridor of energy production. I think you asked, did you ask something else, Kimberly?
No. You hit
Okay.
everything. Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm going to take one of the audience questions to you guys now. So Kaneisha, I'm going to start with you. And if this part may have happened at LSU or with some of the other partners, but could you say anything about whether or not your team did ecosystem asset inventories? So as you were working on your proposal, did you guys map, and I say that in a broad sense, did you look at what were the assets in the region of service and then try to figure out how the engine could engage with that?
Initially, no. But when we brought together the larger group of stakeholders, I think from the 53 that we started out with, we'd asked, well, who's missing from this group? And as a result of that, the initial larger group, our group of 53, we just looked at our networks, some of the coalitions that had already been established through other joint proposal development processes. For example, the Build Back Better, we had already formed a coalition. Most of us who were involved in fuel were also a part of these other large initiatives. So Build Back Better, the EDA tech hubs. So that was a way of building on the strengths and leveraging expertise. We did not have a formal process of asset mapping, but certainly it happened organically. But I definitely see the need for that because there were some gaps that we missed, unfortunately. But I'll get to that, the site visit part later, because the NSF program directors, during the site visit really, challenged us on different parts of our proposal, which helped us to rethink some of the decisions we made initially. So that was actually the site visit. It was demanding, but very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So Catherine, can you talk about that? Did you do ecosystem asset mapping? And it sounds like you guys in your 100 miles, your region, you already sensed for the last few decades what the assets were, but could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'll have to ask our team if there was ever a formal document that was put together, but similar to what Kaneisha was speaking on just this natural assessment of our region, definitely occurred. All of our core partners have been involved in this work and been involved in and partnered on different projects for a long time. And then with regards to our proposal and what we are going to be doing through the engine, a lot of that work had been bouncing around, all of us for a little bit about how do we shift the textile industry towards sustainability and circularity, and what are the current gaps in the supply chain, and what are the strengths of our supply chain, and what knowledge exists here and what doesn't, and what needs to be built and what needs to be leveraged and what needs to, all of that, those conversations had already been started prior to this NSF opportunity. So I'd say that we definitely did a lot of mapping, especially to go after the future of what the textile industry is going to look like with regards to sustainability. And that definitely informed quite a bit of our proposal, especially on the workforce development side. There are so many amazing workforce development programs here in our region. And so looking at what they're currently doing, and then what this engine is going to allow us to do, and how it's going to allow us to expand in different parts of the country, of the state and our region. So yes, I'm giving a long-winded answer.
It's okay. It's great.
After that definitely happened. I think it probably wasn't super formalized, but just with regards to how our work is so community-based and building supply chains is what we do, we definitely saw the gaps. And we're so excited about this engine designation because it's going to allow us to build capacity where we need capacity. So I think hopefully that was succinct.
Awesome. So, and I think one of the reasons we wanted to hear directly from you guys is that I think some teams feel that, this is such an overwhelming process, but to hear you guys talk about it and how it flows organically from relationships and from things that are already happening in the region, I think that helps people to understand how to position themselves for, in the best possible way. So I'm going to pull a question that's related to both of these. That is sort of an addendum to the question. So for the major investments that or programs that ended up in your proposal, did you already have those as pre-existing ideas and you found the engines was a way to fund that? Or did these ideas emerge from the proposal writing process? So, you know, are you already have an idea of what you want to do and you went to engines because you needed the resources, or was it the opposite? Did the proposal writing generate exciting new things that you could do? Maybe Kaneisha, you want to go first on that one?
Sure. I think both. In some ways, yes, we came to the table with some ideas because of our industry, the energy industry in Louisiana. In terms of the funding different components, it really happened during the proposal development process. So our lead organization did not dictate the various program components. We based it on the need. So for example, with HBCUs, there are many in our state of HBCUs who have high research capacity, and helping us setting aside funding through a competitive process for HBCUs and MSIs. That's a way of building capacity in research development, technology, commercialization, that it really is expensive for us to fund. I mean, for example, at my home institution, we do have over 22 domestic and international patents, but it's very expensive working with a patent attorney and reviewing disclosures, and just even in-house, it's challenging, and we don't have sufficient resources for that. So I think that was one of the natural ideas, or early identification. Workforce development, I think we looked at that broadly initially in terms of the community colleges, technical and community colleges, the strengths that they bring in terms of training a workforce where you can see immediate impact. I think it was really a combination of ideas that we had initially, but then a lot of those ideas evolved or expanded. It was really a very inclusive process. We heard from our stakeholder community about needs in their areas and at their institutions. So it happened both ways, but mostly I would say from the stakeholder community, there were a lot of identifications of needs and how the engine could meet those needs, but also how our stakeholders could contribute to solving the issues or the opportunities, addressing opportunities and gaps.
Great, thank you. So Catherine, what about you guys? How did this process work?
Yeah, so with the programs and projects that we've landed on for our first few years, I'd say it took what we had, initially, like our initial ideas that we already had in the works, like pre the NSF project, and put them on steroids, which is so exciting. There were lots of opportunities that were floating around in our industry, but no one had the capacity to invest in them. Thinking about the supply chain and what needs to be built out in order to do some really transformative work in sustainability, the capital investment to create this custom built machinery, to establish the footprint, to do all the upskilling and training that needs to occur, no one had those resources at their disposal to make a shift. And what this engine's going to allow us to do is make the shift quickly and accelerate probably 20 years of work into 5 to 10, which is really exciting. So I'd say we already had a lot of dreams, I'd say, that were on our hearts to do. And then this engine is just took those dreams, and then through the whole proposal process allowed us to, codify them, define them, and really shoot for the stars, which is really exciting.
Yes, and we love to hear that, because that's really, I think, in the spirit of the engines program. So it's great to hear that it kind of came together for you. So the process is never smooth on a big project like this, right? So Kaneisha, can you give us an example of a problem that emerged early on in writing the proposal, and then how the team addressed it and kept moving forward? So, we're thinking it's not really a straight line. There's some bumps along the way. So anything that comes to mind that And sometimes in fixing those, we build the team's strength, right? So it can be a positive, but just anything that you remember that felt hard for a moment, but you were able to get past it.
One of the challenges we had, but it was easily resolved, was that our initial PI, who was the Vice President of Research and Economic Development at LSU, moved on to a different role. So we had a new Vice President of Research at LSU, but also Andy Moss, who later became our new PI. Andy was already involved deeply in the project. So the transition was actually pretty seamless. It just worked out. I'm just trying to think of other challenges. I think working with that large group, as I mentioned before, it was very meaningful. The engagement, again, was intentional, but it can be a lot. You know, if you want true input and you value the input of your stakeholder community. So I mentioned that previously that we had an external firm to help facilitate our meetings. They took notes. It was almost kind of a design thinking process at different points. So because our core partners and the leadership team, we all have different roles at our home institutions, we didn't have, you know, the bandwidth to do all of the legwork. So that for sure helped a lot.
Great, thank you. And Catherine, what about you guys?
Yeah, I'll definitely echo what Kaneisha was talking about having a lot of cooks in the kitchen and how to learn how to facilitate with passionate folks. Yeah, definitely facilitation is critical. The success of any engine is going to be about relationships and bringing people together in a common direction. So that was something, even with, 30 years of relationships already being built, being able to facilitate effectively towards decisions and towards solutions, that always, is challenging. And so one thing that we discovered, or just best practice that we knew from facilitating for quite some time, is you definitely need to have like the ultimate decision makers defined, which we did early on with our lead organization. It's being defined. And then having like really, really organized meetings where you're pushing towards solutions. And if there's a time for, brainstorming, having that space, but then really like pushing towards what the next step is in all of those conversations and getting everyone on board, because to Kaneisha's point, participation is so important. No one person's going to have the solution to any of these massive problems that we're going after, and everyone brings a valuable perspective. And so making room for those perspectives, and then facilitating them in such a way that it drives towards a solution is critical. Again, towards those relationship building skills and stewarding people's life's work, and in the right direction is so important. So yes, I'd say facilitation was definitely something that's always a challenge, but it's a challenge worth pursuing because it again drives such valuable solutions.
So Catherine, did you go and get an outside facilitator, or was one of you on the team considered to be the facilitator or trained as a facilitator in that context?
So we didn't have external facilitators, although that's a wonderful idea. I don't think we're going to take that.
Yeah.
Our team, because of the work we do with the industrial commons, because it is so place-based and because participation is so important to us, I think those are skills that we've been trying to hone across our whole staff, just to execute our work here in Western North Carolina. And luckily our partners and our leadership team, they're awesome folks. They're truly rock stars, and we've been working together for a long time. So I think trust had already been established. And it was more of just like, now we've got this great opportunity. What are we going to put into it? And I think that was more of what we were trying to facilitate. Yep.
Great. So there's a good question that links to this, and I'm going to start with Catherine with this one. So can you talk about how you thought about the budget? So when you're bringing everyone together and identifying the priorities and the needs, what kind of budget structure, or at least structure for the conversation, did you have in the proposal writing to understand how, the lead organization, the core partners, and then maybe also other partners, how they were going to be able to share the award itself, the funds?
Definitely. I think there were a lot of just very frank, open and honest conversations at the very beginning about like, how should we do this? And, how are we going to build these long lasting partnerships, especially, with this award in mind. I think what we also did is we looked at of all of our commitments, all of the deliverables we say we're going to do, like how is this allocation going to where is it going to have the greatest impact? Because we know we have to have a tremendous amount of impact in the next 2 years. So I think it was partially looking at the best use of the funds, what critical infrastructure we need to build in the next 18 months in order to achieve our 10-year goals, and everyone being on board because we participated in the whole process. I think luckily we didn't have any major pushback from anybody on the budget, which was good. So,
And very quickly, can you just say a little bit about the construction piece of how you're using funds?
sure.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the supply chain. So we again are the textile industry. Our core pillar, our focus is around like how do we create opportunity for the textile industry and shift it towards sustainability and circularity, as millions and millions and millions of pounds of fabric waste are going to the landfill every year. How do we, and less than 1% is actually being recycled back into fiber to fiber application to go back into the supply chain. So it's like, how do we take what's this huge waste problem that exists in the textile industry, and how are we going to go about creating a sustainable solution through research and development, translation to commercialization, and workforce development. So that's our engine pitch for the folks who aren't familiar. In order to do that, there's a lot of research and development happening around mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, and different chemistries that need to be taken from the R&D lab to the commercialization phase to be able to scale this impact that can happen in our textile industry. And so a lot of that, there's just missing links to the supply chain. They don't exist because this process doesn't exist currently in the US. So a lot of the bulk of our budget right now is around this investment into equipment that doesn't currently exist, and expansion upon these technologies. So I say, yeah, investment in critical infrastructure is a big part of what we're doing right now. We also have an R&D fund where we're funding research projects that can be critical to the work that we're doing, and a matching fund for some of these entrepreneurial projects. So.
Great. And just to pick up on a detail, in the new solicitation, 25% of the $15 million in the first 2 years can go for infrastructure costs, like construction and related costs. So just for teams to know, there's a little bit of flexibility. And the North Carolina team is using some of the funds that way. Not every team decided to do that, but you guys have a nice project that fits well in that piece. So Kaneisha, what about you guys? I think, we heard you say 150 different stakeholders are part of the team that put the proposal together. So it sounds like a huge amount of money, $15 million over 2 years. But when you started to think about 150 different people, how did you guys have the budget conversation? And what were some of the strategies in the leadership team about it?
So our projects, activities, and programs really drove our budget, which really should be the case. So that is how we determined the budget, and whoever played a role in those different project areas, maybe the lead, which could be one of the core partners, the budget was actually determined that way. So it wasn't really based on, like you said, it's not enough money, especially in the first 2 years, which is the initial part of our budget that we worked on. It's just not a lot of money. Plus, we had to onboard the permanent directors of each component. So that will be a large part of our 2-year budget. And again, just the competitive programs to fund use-inspired research, tech commercialization, funds for the community to implement projects. So it was really project and program driven.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to pick up on the support that you have had maybe from state or local governments. So Kaneisha, can you say a little bit about what Louisiana, how Louisiana's played a part, both at the state and maybe more locally, in helping the engine during the process of writing the proposal, but also now that you've had an award, what has come, and how you think about them as important partners for this?
Fortunately for us, I think because of our economy is so dependent on energy, our government officials, of course, recognized that and saw the value of the engine and made significant investments. I'm not sure if I can say how much, but significant.
We don't need numbers. It's
Okay.
okay.
So yeah, it really signaled to everyone how important the project is and the buy-in we had, even at the government level. The Louisiana Economic Development Agency in particular, the then director of that agency was very committed, not just to the engines, but also initially to the Build Back Better proposals. So we had that commitment initially through our involvement in other programs that the state supported. In terms of local support, I really honestly cannot immediately think of local support outside of the resources from our core partners and stakeholder groups. Our industry partners certainly recognize the value of our project because their workforce will need to be retrained and, upskilling, developing new skills to help their workforce, because that would be a significant challenge for them. So I think that was really key in working with our industry partners, which, I was really pleasantly surprised that they recognized that the energy, excuse me, the energy transition is impending. I mean, it's not something that'll go away. So we really did just have that level of investment from our elected and appointed officials. In fact, our kickoff and launch was hosted by the governor at the governor's mansion. So we really just had a lot of buy-in very early on.
Great, thank you. So what about you guys in North Carolina? It's maybe a little bit of a different flavor to the support in terms of how local it is, county, regional, and state level. I think you guys have stuff going on at all scales. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think what's really exciting about this project is, again, it's leveraging relationships that have been built over a very long period of time, and it's talking about a critical industry for our state and our region. And so we've had tremendous support from all levels of our region and our network with regards to this project. We're really excited for the future of it and what's going to occur as a result of this designation. It's a huge honor for our state. Also, shout out, there was another engine that was designated in North Carolina, in the Wake Forest area. They're phenomenal too. So I think a lot of social support for sure, with regards to everyone being very excited about this project. And then with regards to funding, we had millions of dollars in leverage resources by the time of our site visit. And I don't believe at this time we've had support from the state level. I'm not quite sure. That's above my pay grade. So I can double check on exactly financial sources of where where some of our leverage funds are coming from at this juncture. But all in all, I know our entire state and our industry is very excited about this project as we see the tremendous opportunity that it's going to unlock. So.
Great, thanks. And we're fine to not have exact numbers. I think one of the messages that we get from what you guys are saying is that you need to be thinking about all these relationships early, and that will bring resources on the back end, right? If you build these networks well, people will come with resources. So I think everyone should be hearing that. So I'm gonna give you a kind of open-ended question that comes from our audience. If you knew then what you know now, what would you have done differently in the whole development process, from the start to the finish? And I guess the best way, I think the most helpful way to answer this would just be to think about anything that has become clearer to you now that you have the award, that was a kind of critical piece, or something that maybe you guys hadn't thought as much about that you could have thought about, is another way to ask the question. So Catherine, do you want to go first on this one?
Might need a second to think. That's a good question.
Okay, I don't mind going first.
Okay, Kaneisha, it's all you.
Okay. I kind of hate to admit this, but I think one of the things that we didn't do very early on was community engagement in our untapped and underserved communities. I think the process it just ramped up so quickly, and we had representatives from communities. But I think like going out into community organizations, explaining why this is so critical to communities, particularly underserved communities, helping people make the connection that this isn't just a workforce development project, but also touches on environmental injustices, health disparities. I think that was kind of a missed opportunity at that time. However, we do recognize the importance of that. And I think a portion of the funds will certainly go in that direction. But hearing from the people on the ground, I think would have been beneficial. But I think because many of us are a part of those communities, we brought that perspective. So, but that's definitely something I would change, and so certainly something that we are ramping up to include in our future projects, programs, and initiatives.
So I'm going to prompt you to just give a few more details. For you, inclusive engagement, different from having someone speak on behalf of these communities. Can you
Right.
actually just give a few examples of activities that you plan to do or that you think are really worthwhile that other people could think about as they're trying to do this on the ground work?
I think thinking about communities that have alignment, if not direct, just synergistic activities and organizations with those activities. For example, I mentioned like organizations that community-based organizations that have a strong interest in environmental injustice and the health disparities. You know, Louisiana, the industries, the energy industries are along a corridor that is considered Cancer Alley. So those kinds of projects, I think, are important, looking at complementary and synergistic projects in communities. Having a director of inclusive engagement, really, it's not just checking a box. It shouldn't be. But that asset mapping that someone asked about earlier, looking at smaller organizations that might be doing the work, but they don't receive the funding to do some of the work that would really advance opportunities in their in our communities and having impact. And doing this not just in the areas that might be most impactful, but across the state. Leveraging our existing relationships. For example, a lot of HBCUs have strong roots in communities, but also, I should mention this, not just community engagement. As an aside, I just think it's important to mention, when you think about your HBCU or MSI partners or other underserved, untapped communities, looking at our organizations from a strengths-based perspective is important. It can be, this wasn't the case for us, but in some cases, a lot of times communities are only engaged because someone needs something from the community or to check a box or to say, yes, we did that, but recognizing strengths. So for example, looking at HBCUs, not just in terms of community engagement, but also our research capabilities. I don't think enough attention is placed on that in these kinds of initiatives. So that's certainly one. And also in terms of inclusive engagement, looking at it broadly, not just communities of color, but any untapped, underserved communities, rural communities, communities of by gender, looking at sexual orientation, accessibility, just looking at that broadly. And I would also add that inclusive engagement also means engaging your core partners, your stakeholders in a very meaningful way and not as an aside or an afterthought.
Thank you. I think that's fantastic advice. And a strengths perspective is really important. So I just want to lift that up out of what you said, that this is something that teams should really be thinking about. So Catherine, Kaneisha gave you this great opening to talk about rural. So tell us about this question for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that the Industrial Commons is based in rural Burke County, North Carolina. Fun fact, I grew up on a farm in southeastern North Carolina, 5 miles outside of a 4-stoplight town. So rural economic development is very near and dear to my heart. And thinking about the textile industry, so it was, rooted in rural North Carolina. Huge monolith 800-person factories were all over North Carolina. That was our engine for about 150 years. And then post-NAFTA, steep decline. Burke County was experiencing upwards of 17% unemployment. And when you're in a rural community, the friction in job transition is immense. I mean, here in Morganton, we have 4 restaurants. And so you think about 1,800 people being laid off. You can't go into even the service industry to find employment. So thinking about our lens on rural economic development and our heart for it, and why we know that these jobs are so critical, is because these are our families. Our grandparents were laid off, things like that. So from a DEIA perspective, we are very involved in our community here as a nonprofit, doing all of our nonprofit programming work is rooted in DEIA. Our programming ranges, I'd say it involves anyone from kindergarten through retirement in a lot of our nonprofit programming here in our community. Our motto is around worker ownership and how we build back a more resilient economy through worker-owned models that actually root wealth with frontline workers and decision-making power with frontline workers. So if there's a choice to buy or sell, that should be with the workers who are at that level. So that's our heart behind our work. And very much inclusive participation is a core pillar of everything that we do. Participation, sometimes the road is a lot longer and curvier than you anticipate or would like in some cases, but you always end up with a more fruitful and sustainable solution. So I think high level, I hope I expressed why we do this work and why it's so important to us. And then how some of our activities, I can highlight one of our workforce development programs around engaging opportunity youth. So that's a statistic designated by the government around youth between 16 to 24 that never make the transition from high school to any type of secondary employment or full-time secondary education or full-time employment. They kind of just fall through the cracks. And so one of our main programs is around how do we identify these young people in our community, how do we connect them with mentorship and engagement and internship opportunities that lead to full-time employment. And these programs have since reduced the opportunity youth percentage in our county by, percentage points, which is so exciting because we have one of the highest opportunity youth percentages of our state here in Burke County. So I think I'm rambling at this point, but I hope that you hear inclusion is
Not
very
at all.
important in the work that we do, and deep participation is what I think leads to long-term solutions for anybody. So it should be a core pillar in any of this work that's happening nationwide.
All right, we're just going to be wrapping up right now. I just want to ask one final question before I hand it over to Daniel. So if somebody on the call is interested to partner with you guys, what are the things you look for when somebody new comes to your engine and says, we're interested in what you're doing, we want to be involved? What are some of the things they need to know when they approach you? So what are you looking for? And I'm sure you get more people coming than you can accommodate. So sort of how does that all work? Just a few comments about that.
Sure. So right now we're trying to direct everyone to this contact form on our page on our website. So if you're interested in immediate connection, go to that contact form. It's going to link to a Trello board that we're moving people along. So that's our back-end process there. But with regards for how we're structuring our coalition, I mentioned we have this strong leadership team that are going to be guiding decision-making power, in the future of our engine. This is the group of tight-knit folks that have been working together for a very long time. But we're creating this large ring around that leadership team because this is, again, work that's going to take the whole industry to move forward. So we want everyone at the table. And so definitely reach out if you're involved in the textile industry or passionate about sustainability and what we're doing. We would, absolutely want everybody involved who wants to be involved. Thinking about our current impact of our partners, we have a heat map and it spans the country of our current impact. And so our region of service is North Carolina, part of Virginia, part of South Carolina, part of Tennessee. Our actual impact is much greater. So we want, regardless of where you are in the country, we would love to talk about how we can work together. So
great, thanks. And Kaneisha, what about you guys?
I mean, we already have a large contingent, so
Yeah.
we welcome. We
You're already
welcome
maxed.
yes, in our region of service. Like Catherine's organization, we have a website. You can sign up for updates about our activities, but we broadly welcome participants from various areas within our service region. And no matter how small or large, our experience, we have the experience of managing large groups. So we just welcome anyone who's interested in participating, and questions from other potential engines if they have similar work. So
Awesome. So I want to give you guys a huge round of applause. Thank you so much for everything you shared today and spending time with us. It was a pleasure to talk with you.